Okay. Well, we want to welcome all of you who come tonight, members and guests, and I've been looking forward to this because this is one of my favorite topics. And we have Gary Roberson here to speak to us and show us some information. And I want to tell you a little bit about Gary. I've done my research. He said to just say it's Gary Roberson and let give him the floor, but you don't get off that easy. Now, Gary crawled into his first cave as a Boy Scout on a Boy Scout trip in 1958. And listen to what he said. Caving is one of the few things in the world that allows you to go to a place no human has ever been. It's the earthbound equivalent of going to the moon. I love that. I love that. Going to the moon. We're going to go to the moon except underground. And Gary started surveying the Binkley Cave system in 1967. He graduated from Vanderbilt in Nashville. Gary developed Squire Boone Caverns with two others, purchased Marengo in 1973. By the way, in the Clarion, 50 years ago, just a few weeks ago, I saw this little thing here about Marengo Cave. New owners, Terry Creighton, Gary Roberson, Gordon Smith, and Pat Stevens. I bet you remember that day.
Yeah, that was in August 17th of 73.
And the day too.
Yeah.
I'll let you first. You were married on that. Yeah. Oh, about 1 year later. Okay.
Yeah.
Let's see. Gary also became CEO of Marengo Cave National Landmark, Cave Country Canoes. I love this. Became a Christian in 1980. I love that. Married Laura Lone, 2 children and 3 grandchildren. Is that still accurate?
Got 4 grandchildren.
4 grandchildren. Congratulations. CFO of Noah's Ark Children Village. And you know, this list, it almost made me tired going through this list. Wrote the book 50 Years Under the Sinkhole Plain, which is up here. And you have some books to sell here tonight?
I've got some copies of my latest one, the God Project.
Okay, so
Somebody wants one.
Keep this in mind. We want to buy some books. And let's see here. What was to be Indiana Caverns, you discovered in the Binkley Cave system, and that became Indiana Caverns. I bet we're going to hear a little bit more about that. Maybe.
A little bit.
Not a lot. Okay. Indiana Caverns opened in 2013. Gary has been an Eagle Scout, a Fellow of the National Genealogical Society, Director of Harrison County Chamber of Commerce, Director of Crawford County Chamber of Commerce, President of Lincoln Hills Patoka Lake Tourism Association, Indiana Tourism Development Division, Private Sector Tourism Professional of the Year in 2000. Man, do you really do anything but work?
I didn't until the last 3 years.
Well, Gary, you have accomplished a lot, and it's pretty amazing to read about. Gary has come and agreed to speak to us tonight about the cavers and the caves here in our area. And so, without taking any more of the time, thank you for coming, first of all, but secondly, we're looking forward to hearing from you. So, time is yours.
Okay. It's kind of going to ramble a little bit, but I'll talk some about my life and career in caves, and it's interwoven with cave exploring and show cave development, which was, we don't call them commercial caves in the show cave industry, we call ourselves show caves today. And then I'm also going to talk about some of the really good caves in Harrison and Crawford County, right here where you will all know about where they are if I tell you. And I will preface this by, it's a little intimidating for me because John Vinton back here in the back is probably the leading cave historian in Indiana, and he knows more about Wyandotte Cave than anybody alive today. But Dave Black up here in the front was very active in surveying a lot of these caves, these really difficult caves that I'm going to talk about. So with that, I'll get going. So, first, put the lights down a little.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll start off with a few statistics here. And actually, I learned a lot when I did this. There was a group called the Indiana Cave Survey, which keeps track of all the caves and karst features in Indiana. People send in reports to them. It's all compiled with data online. You can become a member of this and have access to it. But I thought there was a lot more caves, but they were really, what I was thinking of was cave springs and karst feature. But Chief Dunlop, the head of this, said 2,330 caves conservative, might be 50 or 75 more. And of those 2,300 caves, 215 are in Crawford County and 478 are in Harrison County. And the two counties combined have almost 30% of the caves in the state of Indiana. That's me back in 1966 in Wildcat Cave, which is in Orange County up about Valine. But I started cave exploring as soon as the day I got my I started in Boy Scouts, but the day I got my driver's license, I went cave exploring at Cave River Valley and was then running all over the place. But this was just a few years in Wildcat Cave out by Valine, Indiana. But I have roots in Crawford County. This is my dad right here, and his brother Richard. Some of you here probably remember Richard Roberson, who was a school bus driver, lived down here by the Cloverleaf in English for, I think he died in the 80s. And that's my grandma and grandpa, Albie and Terry Roberson. And they, their house was, this is on, right, if you go out to Sycamore Springs Park, right before you get to the low water beds, you can go up on the hill on the left. This is where their farmhouse is. They had a 4.5 acre ridgetop field and ran chickens and pigs on the side of the hill in the woods. And that's where my dad grew up in the 1920s and 30s. And my dad he didn't really like living. It was pretty tough living up there. He always told me that if it was a good year, I got an orange for Christmas. If it was a bad year, I didn't get in. And so he got out and went to school and had a career with the L&N Railroad, so I grew up in New Albany, but as soon as I got off to drive, I came out here and started caving. So next slide. That's a picture of me when I'm 11 years old. I'm getting ready for my first Boy Scout camping trip that went to Cave River Valley up near Spring Mill Park. In fact, Spring Mill Park controls and owns Cave River Valley now. But I crawled into some caves at 11, and that was it from then on. That's as soon as I couldn't wait to get my driver's license so I could go. Next slide. That's me in one of my first early pictures in the Binkley Cave system. Right after we started working in 1967, some areas we used rafts in it back then. So Indiana Caverns, which I developed a few years ago, is part of the Binkley Cave. And this is my 57th year of being. I don't really the trips are too long, but I help by helping finance scaling poles and things like that. So next slide. One more. This is a map of the Binkley Cave. You see the town of Corydon right up here, and the scale of this little thing here is about 1,000 feet. So this is a big cave. It's over 46 miles. There's about 43 miles on this map, but it's all on here. You'll notice the cave runs in these kind of lines, so it does roughly follow joints in the limestone. Right here, I'll talk about this a little later. We talk about Harrison Spring as the sinks at Indian Creek. This whole big part of the cave here, a lot of which has been found in recent years, you can see it falls, and actually this cave goes underneath the sinks at Indian Creek, and that's where the water goes down into the cave and goes to Harrison Spring. Next slide. I started off in the show cave industry. We were surveying in Binkley Cave, and a guy from New Albany named Fred Conway came to the owner of Harvey Binkley, wanted to buy it to develop it. And we told him, or when we got out of the cave from the trip that day, Harvey said, well, he'd sell it to his boys that explored the cave first, so you have to talk to them. So he got the phone number. I called up this Fred Conway, and I said, well, you really don't want to buy Binkley. It'll be too hard to develop. You want to buy this Boone's Mill Cave, which it was called, which is down by Mockport, which is Square Boone Caverns today. And There's no road in from this side like you come in to go on the tour. And so Fred came to my house the next day, where I was with my mom, where I grew up, showed him some pictures. He went out and bought the cave without ever even seeing it. He bought this is 1971. He got 110 acres where that cave is for $15,000. But he bought it without even seeing it. Then he said, now show me the cave. Then he asked us if we wanted to develop it for him. So me and two other guys there. And that's Terry Creighton and Ken Hooper, who's passed away, and me up on top. But putting one of the bridges there. After we completed Marengo in Memorial Day of '73, in August of '73, Gordon Smith, another caver who did a lot down in Mammoth, came to me and got together with me and Terry, who had worked on Squire Boone, a guy named Pat Stevens, who was a caver from Louisville, and I think we can go back. Yeah, and he was. So we bought Marengo Cave. In 1979, we put in the dripstone tunnel turn. Just put this, we were digging the tunnel there where you go in the dripstone. That's me here. I was kind of fat at that time. So I got in pretty bad shape. If anybody knows the Wyman's around here, this is Bob Wyman, and he was my right-hand man for 22 years. This is Perry Presidius, and still lives down here. Everybody knows Perry. And this is Jerry Sin. I don't know what happened to him. These guys were all in high school. We were blasting this tunnel with drills standing on a table. I mean, they'd throw us in jail today if we tried to get by with that. Back here's there's a lot of pierces. That's Jerry Pierce. That's a hole where he just broken into the cave there where Jerry's sticking his head out through the hole. So, yeah, that's one of the big projects. We did a lot of different things in Marengo. Next slide. And this is Gordon Smith. Yeah, he's a big caver in Mammoth Cave and back in the 60s, and that's me. And we bought in the fall of '83, it was a big drought, and so Dick Lambert, who was running Murphy's Canoes then, he didn't have a good year, so he wanted to sell out, so we bought Murphy's Canoe Livery, and we had a pretty good relationship with Paul Hart, who had Blue Marina down the street, which was really a good operation. Paul had a much better operation than Murphy's was. But Paul came to us a year later and said, you want to buy me out? So we bought him, so that's how it kept together. And we tied it in with Marengo Cave, so we gave it the name Pink Country Canoes. And for years we had thousands and thousands of people came in packages, Boy Scouts and church groups, and spent the nights in campgrounds or bunkhouses. They still do that, but not like it was back then. Boy Scouts and church groups don't do as much of that stuff as they did back in, say, the 80s and 90s. Next slide. This is my wife, Laura. You already mentioned her, but she grew up south of Milltown, and some of you might remember Delbert Dimon, who owned the liquor store in Milltown. That was her stepfather, and he was quite a character. And Laura, her parents had gotten divorced, and so her mom moved down. She was married to Delbert, and she wanted to be down here with her mom, but her dad lived up in Gary. So if you want to know anything about why my wife was a little weird, she split time between a dairy farm in Crawford County and Gary, Indiana. When she was growing up, she got kind of sent back and forth between the two places. So that's a little history on our next slide. After Marengo Cave, I sold out in 2001 to Gordon. We were both 50% owners at that time. The others had gotten out. I sold out, and then I started going back and exploring, and Binkley's reactivated the survey. And in 2010, they found a new part of the cave, and so we decided in 2012 to develop it in the Indiana Caverns. And this is our grand opening day. That's me, Laura, and Rob Houchins, one of my partners at the cave. The day of the grand opening, June 15th, 2013. Next slide. Since I wrote this book, 50 Years Under the Sinkhole Plain in 2009, most of us, John Benton back here was in on it, Richard Fig Newton here. I would caving with him since Purdue days and back in the 60s, but we were all getting too old, couldn't get anybody to go anymore, so I said, well, we got to keep our knowledge so it doesn't get lost. And so the guy named George, who was one of our group who lived in in Pennsylvania. I wrote 50 Years Under the Sinkhole Plain. I thought 100 years from now somebody will pick this up and do some work in the cave. At that time, Binkley Cave was 22 miles, but unbeknownst, I tried to get Dave Black here to do pictures for me, but he was too busy with the Corps, so he said, well, you talk to Dave Everton. So this guy named Dave Everton, another caver, and he come down, took pictures, and he got interested in it, reactivated the projects. So in the next few years, from 2008 till really 2016, they doubled the length of the cave from 22 to 44 miles. And that was because of writing the book. If I hadn't written the book, that probably wouldn't have happened. So I thought it would be a long time coming, but it came right away. So, but I've written 4 other books. This is a geology of the Binkley Cave System in Indiana Caverns. The longest year is the story of the development of Indiana Caverns, which is quite a story in itself. We should have killed a dozen people, but we didn't kill any in doing that. But it was quite a project. And then my latest one here is called The God Project. It's kind of my autobiography, but it also tells the whole history and exploration of the Binkley Cave System. So it's a 600 and some odd page book, but if anybody's interested, you can get one. All right, next. Now I'm working a book called Hoosier Cavers in Their Caves. And I came down here one day to do some research and talk to John. He said, well, will you come speak? So that's how I went back here. Now, the first explorers in Indiana were the Native Americans. And Wyandotte Cave has the most evidence of Indians' use of the cave. And they used it from about 2200 BC to 800 AD, so about 3,000 years. And much of the information that's going to come from here on now is going to be out of the 2007 NSS Convention Guidebook. The NSS is the National Speleological Society. It's the national organization of cavers. And they had their convention at the 4-H Fairgrounds by Moraine in 2007. They put out a great book, hundreds of pages long. I stole a lot of pictures out of that to do this talk tonight. That's and one of the pictures here, this is in that book, is a 100-foot pit. It's a 1938 photo by George Jackson. You can see this guy over here. Can you slide that a little bit to just this way so you can see that? Now, when George Jackson is one of the first, what we call modern cave explorers in here, they weren't very modern. They didn't have any. I thought when I started we didn't have much equipment in the 60s, but they're wearing a felt hat and coming down a 100-foot pit. I don't know if he's it looks like he's just hanging on there, and maybe somebody's belaying and lowering him. I really don't know. John, do you know?
As far as I know, no. He's just on the rope,
Okay.
without any attachments.
It doesn't. Anyhow, their stuff was pretty primitive, but George Jackson was the first person in Indiana to join the National Speleological Society. His number's number 151. So, and now I think they're up to about 85 or 90,000. Is that right? People have been members. Yeah, and he joined it in the first year that it was developed. The first person in Indiana. Next slide. Now, where are the caves here? This dotted area here is what we call the Mitchell Plain. And that's the area over there by Corydon, up to Palmyra. It really runs all the way up to Bloomington. But that's the relatively flat rolling area with all the big sinkholes. There's a lot of stream caves and a lot of caves in that. And this darker color here to the west is the Crawford Upland. That's where we are here in Crawford County. And you can see the Crawford Upland extends into western Harrison County and covers all of Crawford County. And then the eastern part of Harrison County is in the Mitchell Plains. Next slide. And scoot that over a little bit to this one. And you can. This is another picture. You can see where Corydon is. It sets in the western part of the Mitchell Plain and the escarpment. And if you notice, this escarpment runs all the way down into Kentucky. Here's Mammoth Cave. It's in the same room, just west of the escarpment, like Wyandotte Cave is just west of it here. So it's the same type locality where the big caves are here in Indiana as they are down on Mammoth Cave. Next slide. And this is really out of date, but you can see these little dots. These are back in the, like in 1970 where caves were. And there's a lot more caves known today, but it still gives you a relative idea. I think this is Crawford. You see all the caves listed there. There is a few over here, but there's a lot more in this extreme eastern part near Wyandotte, all the way down to the Ohio. And then you can see Harrison County, which has the most caves of any part, any county, is a lot more concentrated. The whole western half is just caves everywhere. So it kind of gives you an idea where the main caves are around here. Before I turn, you can see this is the glacial boundary, and that's why we have the caves. The furthest, most glacial advance missed this one area in Indiana. That's where most of the caves are, although there's a few more. I mean, a number of caves over around Madison and North Vernon in the cave area there. Okay, now, who was really there's probably somebody in the late 1800s that I don't know about that was pretty serious, but Bill Clifton here was a guy at Marengo Cave for 50 years, and he came to work for Marengo in 1914, and right around that time you find Bill's name in a lot of caves all over Crawford County. And so, to me, as far as I know, he was the first person who systematically went into a lot of caves. And I remember when I first went to Marengo, Bill was old, but he was still around. He'd walk up to the cave every once in a while. So I got to talk to him. This was him in 1965, right at the end of his career at Marengo. Back in the old days, they didn't keep somebody there all the time. They had a bell. You ring this bell if you wanted to have a sign so you want a cave tour. Bill lived just down here the street. He'd hear the bell and walk up and give you a tour. This is Charles Fitzgerald, who was manager of the cave in the 1930s. That's his home. Now, Wyandotte Cave, I'm sure everybody's really familiar with that. It's the fourth oldest show cave in the U.S. And back when I was growing up in the 50s, if you opened an encyclopedia to do a report on caves or anything, you'd see 4 caves: Ray, Mammoth, Carlsbad, and Wyandotte. Those were the 4 caves that were in most encyclopedias. So Wyandotte was very well known and considered one of the great caves of the country back then. This is a map. We'll see some more of that later on. In 1966, the state purchased it, and they don't promote it as well, so it's actually a lot less well known today than it was then. It's the 5th longest cave in Indiana at 9.4 miles, and the state was really wanting to close it down. Some of the people at the forestry in the early 2000s, they were into trees and didn't really want to care that much about the cave. They would close it, so they leased it to Gordon Smith, who owned Marengo Cave. Right after I sold out, they leased Wyandotte to him. I'm going to talk about that more later. Next slide. Here's a picture of George Jackson at the Double Pits. And again, he's a well-known, famous person. He began caving as a 13-year-old scout. He was the first NSS member in Indiana. At one time was considered one of the best cave photographers in the 1940s. He was an associate editor of the National Magazine then. Was the head of the membership committee. Was the first person to be named a fellow of the NSS from the state of Indiana. And he was executive vice president of the NSS and won the Outstanding Service Award. He moved away from Indiana and from Wyandotte in 1958 and returned as we was retired and lived in New Albany when he passed away. And I got to meet him when he was in New Albany. I think John met him a lot more than I did. But George was very, very well known, one of the most well-known people in the NSS in the late 40s and early 50s. Next slide. And I know John could probably tell you more about this, but this guy's named Joe Seibert, and this is from Gordon Smith's collection of pictures. But supposedly he's got flares or Roman candles here, but would this be the real early 1900s, John?
Yeah.
This is going in Wyandotte real early. And of course, they weren't even using kerosene lamps, and they were using candles and stuff to go in there. That's the entrance right behind me there. Next slide. And this guy here is F.F. Rothrock. F.N. Rothrock. I don't think he did that much caving outside of Wyandotte, but he's got a low NSS number. It's number 319, so he was one guy. Next slide. This is Charlie Rothrock in the Helectite group. This is the part of Wyandotte. It's called the Discovery 41, where they go in there, you walk through the trench. And most of Wyandotte that was known up until the 1980s was discovered back in the 1800s. George and them really didn't find that much, but they did dig out the where all the helectites were, make that a part of the tour of the 40s. And so, next slide. This is BB Hole Cave, and the cavers, this is a well-known cave, but George Jackson and them, they dug this open on the Rothrock property or the cave, and this was in somewhere in the middle 1950s. And you can see it's been excavation. It was a real dangerous entrance, so they built this little building over it. And BB Hole was one of the first caves I went in once I got my driver's license. This wood was still here, but it had all fallen down. And when you went down in the cave, you went down a steep slope. Rocks were rolling everywhere, and it's closed up a couple of times. So there's pictures from this cave on the cover of the NSS News in the 1950s. It was real well known. This is Bob Loudon here on the right. He was one of the managers of Wyandotte Cave. Lived right there on Highway 62. I remember meeting him when I was young. And this is Wally Wilkerson of the Wilkersons from Leavenworth and George Jackson. Next slide.
Is this cave close to Wyandotte?
Yes, it's to the northwest of Wyandotte. Back, if you go up the valley behind Wyandotte Lake, about a mile, John?
Yeah.
About a mile up there. It's on the right-hand side of the
Well,
valley.
it's actually collapsed on itself again.
You skip one.
Sorry.
Okay, this is Easter Pit, and there's a name up here at the top. I thought maybe not, but no, it's not. This is the Easter Pit entrance. Leo Schotter, which I'm going to show you a picture of later. Leo was one of the early modern cave explorers from Milltown, and he discovered Easter Pit up north, about a mile east of Wyandotte in 1967. Our group, the Indiana Speleological Survey and the Purdue Outing Club, was in there just within a month or two after there, and we were down in the bottom of it, blasting and digging around, looking for where the air was coming from. And two of the guys from Purdue two brothers got in a fist fight in the bottom of the pit, and caused a big consternation. So we had to get out of the cave. We never went back, but we were real close to where they found it. Well, 19 years later, these guys here, Ted Wilson, Danny Dowell, and Goodwill Master, they broke through into this, and in 1986, a year later or so, they connected into Wyandotte. Next picture. This is some of the passage. Looks like a passage in Wyandotte, but this is what I think what they call the inner sanctum, or it's a big 4-hole breakdown passage in Easter Pit. And they actually wound up adding 2.75 miles in that part and connecting them into Wyandotte. So it's the biggest find that's been found in Wyandotte since they found the new road from the old cave went back to the pillar, and new cave went to Rothrock's Cathedral. But this is the biggest thing found since then. Next slide. And here's where they made the connection. The Easter Pit's up here, but they came down through some passages. And you can see how small this is. They went back through here at a place called Fool's Dome, and they had to fold up the dome and dig. Lots of dig trips through. Dave, were you in on any of that? It's tight. It's tight, yeah. Really tight here, but it connects into Avenue 3, which comes in right by the crater rim if you've been on the tour at Wyandotte. But they worked really, really hard and were able to connect that in. It was quite, from the caver's point of view, it was a part discovery. Once they connected it, at that time Roger Gleitz, some of you may know, was the manager of Wyandotte Cave, and he gave them access to the main cave once they connected this new part in. And they found all kinds of new stuff in Wyandotte that had been missed by George Jackson and others. And Roger, I always put my plug in for Roger because he loved Wyandotte Cave and he promoted it, but he got terminated by the state a few years later, and I thought it was a real abuse of power by the government. I always want to defend Roger because I thought he was a great person. Loved cavers, loved the cave, and promoted it. Next slide. Now, after Gordon Smith took over the caves in the early 2000s, Gordon was a caver, so he recruited John back here and me and some others. We went back to a place called Butler Point, and we did a bunch of dig trips over a couple of years. This is John here, and this is me in the background, a couple other young cavers from Marengo there. And we found a new part called the Skyline Road, which is up at the top of a ledge 20 feet off the floor you had to dig back into. That's the latest find of Wyandotte. Next slide. And here's Butler Point, the farthest to the northeast extent of the cave, and up on a ledge 20 feet off the floor we dug and found this piece here. The other group that had come in a few from after finding Easter Pit found the Tees and Wind and down in this area. But it was interesting. Most people think that Wyandotte Cave was closed because of white nose syndrome, but it was really closed because when we found this, it had nice gypsum and stuff and nice passages, and Gordon took lots of nice pictures of it, and he gave it to the state and to show what he found. Well, technically speaking, it's against the law to dig in a cave, so at the end of the year, they terminated his lease and closed Wyandotte Cave. 2 years before White Nose got here, we told everybody it's because of White Nose, but it was really because us cavers had found a new passage for the same we thought they'd be happy in the door. So, yeah. Next slide. All right, now here's some of the early cavers from right here in English that I thought you'd be interested. This is Ferris Mock and his son Danny. Ferris was NSS number 548, so he must have joined in 1942 or 43. He did a lot of caving in Wyandotte, was an associate of George Jackson. He maintained his NSS membership his whole life, and I never got to meet him. That's my fault, not his. I kept putting it off. His house got flooded there on 5th Street in the 79 flood and lost all his stuff. But next slide. This is a picture of him in World War II, and he was a friend with Julian Longus, that some of you may have known, I don't know. They were buddies and went caving together. Next slide. And this is for Ferris's badge from Wyandotte Cave. They have really fancy badges. I got a picture of this from his daughter, Tracy Spencer, who now lives in Tennessee. And that was about the only thing left. But Ferris ran a bottle gas business and a Philco radio shop on 5th Street down there just back behind where the English Bank used to be, I guess. And he was a real early radio buff and built a crystal set when radios come out. My sister told me, I didn't even know this, that my dad built one of those. He had to hide it because his parents didn't believe in radios, but that he built one too. But anyhow, Vic McGinnity, who was one of the people who was in on starting the golf course here in English, he grew up down here, and he remembers his dad walking in past Ferris's shop in 1939 or 40, and there was 100 people standing in 5th Street. Ferris was broadcasting one of Joe Lewis's fights over a loudspeaker. There was like 100 people standing in the street listening to the fight, so I thought that was a pretty cool historical thing, so I put that in there. Oh, next slide back. This is Julian Longus and his two sons here. Julian, he had an even lower number than Ferris, 375, and was a life member of the NSS. Lived here in English. His
Dad owned the English Theater, which I saw lots of movies in the 50s, and when I come to visit my grandparents. And again, they were connected with George Jackson at Wyandotte Cave and did most of his caving around there. But there's pictures from an NSS convention in Louisville in 1953, and you can see Julian and Ferris at the Pillar of the Constitution in those pictures if you look close enough. Next slide. This is Bob Roberts, who I think is probably a member of this esteemed group, and I hadn't met him, but my wife, Laura, when she worked for the welfare department here before we were married, she worked with his wife, Lois, and so we went to visit him, and I found out that he'd been a caver. It turns out that while he didn't keep his membership, they don't ever give your number to somebody else if you leave. They just keep going. But Bob is NSS number 1091, and he's undoubtedly the person still alive in Indiana who ever had the lowest NSS number. And he could be the lowest in the country or close to it. He's probably in the top, probably only 3 or 4 people that are older than him that were ever a member of the NSS that are still alive. So that's kind of a neat claim to fame too. This is Sam Riley. I don't know if any of you all, I never got to meet him that I know of, but I had a friend, an old sign painter at Ringo called Earl Vanderpool, who painted signs for us, and he always talked about Sam Riley. He said he was a great promoter of Wyandotte Cave, and I think he's announcing a tour here. But Sam was a state legislator in the 1950s, and he ran Wyandotte from 1931 till he died of a heart attack in 1956. He was a state legislator, sponsored the first cave protection legislation which passed in the state of Indiana. And he also, he started, I think there's another slide in my head maybe. Yes. He started Cavemen of America in 1944. It was going to be an organization of show cave owners. And it didn't last, but they did have a meeting. You can see all these caves that came to it. But he tried to start that, and then finally they got the what we call the National Caves Association, which is all the private owners of show caves, started in the 1960s, and he's kept going ever since. But Sam was the person with the first idea for that. Must have been an I was told that he always had a Wyandotte brochure in his pocket, and he always gave them to anybody, and I think maybe that's one of the reasons Wyandotte was in the encyclopedias with Ray and Mammoth and all that. Next slide. This is Dave sitting right here. I couldn't figure where to put this in. This is Glenn Lanaster in front of him. There are some Redstone pools. I just thought, move that over just a little bit. That we're in a Redstone street. But Dave, a lot of the caves I'm going to show now were the heyday of exploring caves in our area was really 1970s, 80s, and 90s. And Dave Black was eminently involved in a lot of the cases I'm going to show with a number of other people. And Dave in 2002 won the Lou Bicking Award, which most cavers who are active cavers think is the most important award you can get. It's given to the person who's done the most caving in the last, over a period of time. It takes a huge body of work to win this award. Dave, there's been 3 people from Indiana. When Dave lives up in Harrison, aren't you? Or he lives in Harrison County, real close to the Floyd line, so I'm never sure. But so he's the only local person who's ever won this award, and a guy named Dave Everton won it since then for his work in the Binkley Cave later on. Another guy named Norm Pace, who used to be here listening, Colorado, he's won it. So only 3 people from Indiana have ever won this award. Next slide. This back to Marengo. My partner Gordon Smith at Marengo for years, he's the biggest collector of show cave memorabilia in the world. And he's now built a museum down at Diamond Caverns. John's on their board down there. And they have where he's stored all this. And people from all over the world send him his memorabilia about show caves and caves. So it's open by appointment for research. But Gordon was collecting postcards when I met him. We bought Marengo back in 1973, we always knew there was a building in Marengo over the original entrance to the cave, but nobody could find the picture. I'd already sold out of Marengo to Gordon. Finally, he found this picture, which is over the original sinkhole where the cave was discovered in 1883, and they used that entrance until 1910 when they put in the Crystal Palace entrance, which they go in now. But it was like 2003 or 4, he finally found a picture of that building. I don't know if you all have one here or not, but he had seen that. But the cave was actually right underneath it. So, all right, next slide. Of course, the Marengo Cave Band, which played in music hall, a lot of places in the cave. That was a big thing for, I'm sure English had one and everybody had one, but they called theirs the Marengo Cave Band because of the cave. And when the railroad came through, that's what made Marengo Cave, because it came right through Marengo, and they could run railroad excursions out of Louisville and St. Louis, and people would get off down by the Murphy House, I think it was, down there. It was a hotel. They could eat, and then people with their wagons would come over, pick up the people, haul them over the cave for a nickel or whatever it was. I don't know, probably much. And go through the cave, and then come back, stay at the hotel, and get on the train. So Marengo's heyday was from the late 1800s to the early 1900s, and then Marengo went backwards, was barely open when we bought it in 73. And so, but now it's the most attended show cave in Indiana. Next slide. That's what the gift shop looked like when we bought it in 73. Some of that's still hidden in the building there somewhere, but we built on around. We bought it from Lucille Ryman and Jack and Patsy Hollis, who some of you may know. And Floyd Denton was Lucille's first husband. And he bought the cave in the 50s and was starting to do a whole lot with it, put in new lights, built this building. But then he had a stroke or a heart attack in the cave and passed away. And so then it languished until we bought it. In 1992, there was a passage off Pillar Palace that had always been there. You could hold your hand up. I could tell guys to point it out. We call it the Blowing Back Crawl. In the summer, you could feel a breeze coming out of it. Gordon and I did some digging in there, but we were too busy. I was too busy running the cave, and Gordon did other stuff. He didn't work there all the time. So we got Dave and other people. They came down they one night to work on the crawl for us. And I thought, well, they're going to be digging here for months, and maybe they'll get through. And then a guy named Chris Schotter, who I'll talk about in a little bit, who worked for me, and he called me at 5 o'clock in the morning and says, Gary, you won't believe it, but we found the biggest cave passage in Indiana. The first night they did it, and this is part of that. That's a person standing there where I've got it circled red. This is a new discovery of Marengo, which is about a mile long, big borehole passage, really impressive. Next slide. And now I'm going to talk some more about wild caves. One of the early wild caves that was explored back in the 70s this is Parker's Pit. It's 105 feet deep. It's down in the forestry there. As you go in, as you pass those log cabins on the left-hand side of the road, it's back behind in the woods. It's on private property, though, and generally not open a lot of times for caving. It was the first deep cave in the forestry to be pushed. Next slide. This is a map of the cave. It's 2 and some odd miles long, but one time it was considered like the most difficult cave in Indiana. You go down this pit and you have to swing over into an alcove and then go into the jointed dome. Then you have to go to a little canyon with an S-bend, and if your femur's over so long, you can't get through it. And there's another bend called the Z-bend. So it strains out the bigger cavers and the small ones. They found a lot of caves. I think it may or may not still be the 5th deepest cave in Indiana, but it was one time. That's one of the big caves there near the Harrison Crawford State Forest. Next slide. Another one is called Ted's Dig, and that's down in the southern part. If you go down Cold Friday Road there, and you have to go south down the valley towards the Ohio River, they got in. Ted Wilson dug in, started digging on it in the late 60s, and they finally was 15, 20 years later when they got in. This is a picture of Aaron Atz. I don't know if anybody knows Jim Atz or his, what was his, can't think what his dad's name was, but he used to run a store in Milltown. But anyhow, the Atzes were from Milltown. Chris is, Aaron is a caver. He lives in Alabama now. He's in that room there. This Ted's Dig is a couple of miles long and considered one of Indiana's most fun sporting caves for cavers. People love to go through it. Now, these caves have all been closed for white nose until, just the last year they've opened back up. So you can go in. Next slide. This is a map of it. It's a real complex cave with one big long passage. It was dug open in 1981. Next slide. This is the most difficult cave in Indiana by most people's standards. It's called Two-Bit Pit. And in 1968, I was there when we dug it open. We did a little blast and dug it open. When we dug it open, it was only a 20-some-odd foot pit. The bottom was a narrow crack moving air. And we never did anything with it because we were working on Binkley's. But they came back and they did some digging. In 1989, they broke into the big part of the main part of the cave. And it is now, I think, the second deepest cave in Indiana. You get 253 feet below the edge. If you know where the actual horse camp, not the one in the modern campground, but the one that's down in the valley to the left of the road through the forestry. Two-Bit Pit goes underneath there and falls at Potato Run Creek underneath it. This low water from that dry stream bed all drains through this cave. Next slide. Two-Bit Pit, I never was in the tough part of it, but it's got a crawlway. It's only 300 feet long. But some people take 2 to 3 hours to get through it. It's so tight. And when you get down to the lower levels of the cave, you need a wetsuit. You can't wear your wetsuit through this. So you have to have your pack and your wetsuit, and you have to carry it. But you're in this narrow canyon, and you can slip down or drop those things down in there, and it takes you forever to get them out. It's a really dangerous thing that only experienced people should go through. This is one picture and another picture. Take a look. This is called the Terminator. This is one part of that crawlway. You can see he's just filling the whole thing up. You're wedging yourself through there. And but besides this canyon, there's 6 pits that you have to drop in there to get down to the base level stream. So if anybody ever got hurt in there, you'd have to drill a hole. That's the only possible way you'd ever get them out. Next slide. You get down to the bottom, there's a like a mile long big base level river running under Potato Run Dry Bed Creek up there. But to get in it, once you went down the 6 pits and through this notorious canyon, there's a thing called Neptune's Retreat, which is a 2,200 foot water crawl. And so it's hands and knees in water, and so that's just you gotta have a wetsuit in there. So Two-Bit Pit's the 12th longest cave in Indiana, 3.5 miles long, and generally considered the most difficult cave in Indiana. Next slide. Right near Wyandotte is a cave called Everton Cave, which years ago was called Wendigo Dome Cave. It was discovered by George Jackson and crew, but the most beautiful part wasn't found until the 1980s. These are selenite needles in that new part of the cave. And Everton is a discontinuous part of Wyandotte Cave. You can tell it used to connect, but it doesn't anymore. But the entrance is always collapsing. There's been people trapped in there, and there's times when you can't go in because all this breakdown falls in. So it's periodically you can get in other times. Of course, they have a gate on it now, but it's got some of the nicest, it's probably the nicest gypsum, I guess, in the state of Indiana. Next slide. Another cave. Some of you surely know Eric Morris that owns a rock shop down at Leavenworth. Well, Eric found this cave in 1995. It's called Eric's River Cave. And it's 1.7 miles long, and it's off a dry run just south of Leavenworth. It's a really cool cave, and kind of an easy one. It's dangerous. The entrance, because you can get trapped in there from flooding. And when you get back here, Rumble Alley's called that because you're near the interstate there and you can hear the cars going over the top. But next slide. But it's got a nice, most of it's just nice walking river passage. It's got a lot of blind fish in it. It's really easy, fun cave. And one of the later big discoveries in this immediate area that found in 1995. Next slide. Look for that. Put over it. This cave just went down a little hole. Some people in my group worked on it again back in the 60s, but we didn't do anything with it. 1989, they got to a little tight spot down in there. It's still tight because I've been in there, but before that, nobody could fit. And they broke into a big borehole passage. And if any of y'all remember, 11 years ago, the guy that they were looking for that was missing for, I don't know, it took a couple of months, didn't it, to find him, or 6 weeks, or anyhow, he committed suicide.
So and gave up, and they found the body a year later.
Okay, yeah, I knew it was a long, but anyhow,
Technically, the cave was closed.
yeah, he committed suicide, and that's where they finally found it. But it's really big, nice cave near Wyandotte. Look who took that picture, Dave Black, right here. Okay, next slide. Of course, a famous feature in this area that you truly know about is Harrison Spring over north of White Cloud there off of the Blue River, which is Indiana's largest spring. And it really drains most of the western half of Harrison County. And back in the early 1990s, Dave Strickland and some other divers, they did extensive diving in there. Got down 75 feet, and they mapped about almost 2,000 feet underground. And there's what they call the cold water passage, which goes north towards Palmyra, and the warm water passage that comes from the St. Indian Creek. Next slide. And this here is the spring. It's Harrison Springs right here, and on Blue River, which is flowing right down here. But this whole area up here is drainage for it. You see Central Barren, there's Palmyra. So the cold water passage drains almost up to Palmyra, all the way down to Harrison Spring there by Highway 62. Now, Indian Creek is coming along here, and this is where Indiana Caverns and all is over here. And I showed you how that passage has the trend. The water from Indiana Caverns goes under the Indian Creek, and the sinks, the water, when it's dry like it is now, all the water coming from Floyd Knobs, if you go through Cordon down west of the sinks, west of town, it'll all be going in these holes, dropping into the cave, and Indian Creek is totally dry below that. And that water, so all the water in low flow, all the water from Floyd Knobs comes out Harrison Spring, but it flows on the surface in Indian Creek first. Which is kind of neat, so most of the southern part is between Indian Creek and Buck Creek, drains through the Big Cay system, the Harrison Spring, and then it comes down from the north. So it's really one of the great spring features in the world, really, of Carter Spring. Next slide. Now we're going to see some more local cavers. This is Leo Schotter here. This is a guy named Mark Gerber from Tell City, and we're getting ready to go on what they call Keck's Pit. And Leo was one of the first really, truly modern cavers. Him and his boys, they started using single rope techniques instead of climbing cable ladders and stuff before almost anybody in Indiana. You see this picture, I don't know when it was taken. There's a cable ladder, but he's on some kind of a rig where he's going to go down the rope with a single rope instead. And the Schotters were one of the big caving families. Leo and his 2 boys and his grandson were all from cavers. Leo was an electrician in Milltown. Next slide. That's his son Alan, Devil's Graveyard Cave down near Binkley, 1964. Notice they're using carbide lamps in. Next slide. This is Gary Schotter. A lot of you all knew Gary. He was a plumber from Milltown. He's in a pit. I guess they named it after him. This is 1961. Again, they were already climbing on single ropes when most people were still climbing cable ladders. So they were real pioneers in modern caving. Next slide. And this is Chris Schotter. He lives in Harrison County now, but he's the grandson of Leo, and he's done a lot of caving with Dave. A lot of these caves that I'm showing you in these pictures. He worked for us at Marengo Cave in the 1990s, and he went on to be one of these people. Since 9/11, we can't use dynamite anymore. Can't get it because of the after 9/11 they locked all the dynamite up. So now what cavers do to get into a cave, they need to move a rock. They drill a hole in it with a portable battery drill, get a drinking straw from McDonald's, put a hot glue in one end filled with gunpowder, put an electric lead in the other end with a little nichrome wire between it, hot glue the other end, drill a hole just the side of the straw, slide the straw in, put plumber's putty over it, and then they get back around the corner, touch it off with the battery on the electric light, and they break up rocks. And it works out a lot better than dynamite because you can direct your charge, and it's really helped people find a lot of new cave passages. But Chris was one of the first people around here who really got good at that and taught a lot of other people how to do it. Excellent. The other early caver here was Louis Lehman in Cordon, and I don't know, being from Harrison County, how many knew it, but down there where the Lazy Cow Creamery and the bagel lady is downtown, that used to be the Lehman Davis hardware store. And Louis was an early caver, and you can see where I got circled. His NSS number was 2,187. And when I was in high school and then on in college, when we needed carbide or a part for our carbide lamp, we'd come to Louis' hardware store, buy it, and talk to Louis about the caves. And he'd tell tales and all kinds of stuff. But Louis is the one that got us going in Binkley Cave. So I probably would have not spent 57 years in that cave if it wasn't for Louis Raymond and his hardware store here. So yeah. And I got the distinction of being one of the people that got to take Louis on his last big cave trip. This is Sloan's Valley Cave down in Kentucky. They call it the garbage pit. He's coming out of an actual cave, but there was washer stoves and everything thrown in there, but very big cave, 27 miles long. But we did that the day the man first walked on the moon in July '79. We were down there at a convention and took him in there. So that was, he got me started. We're still going 57 years later. Okay, next slide. And the first group to go in Binkley's was the Cordon, that we know of as the Cordon Cavemen. This is a picture from the early 1930s, and a bunch of them in front of the store there. But they've been going what they call Miles Cave, which is now Binkley's Cave. And Louis was not in that picture, I don't think, but here he is in Langdon's Caves back here, which is in the forest right there on as you drive in and get back there about half a mile, it's on the right. And it's one of the well-known caves that people went in the 1800s. And I think this is 1938. Again, look at it. These guys are what we call early modern cave explorers. There's not a hard hat. Guys wearing felt hats and probably look like they're in their Sunday clothes, but that's the way people went caving up in the 30s and 40s. Next slide. And Louis was so well known that they named the Louis D. Lehman Award for Outstanding Service, which is kind of like the award that any caver in Indiana, it's kind of like the highest award you can get here. And I was fortunate enough to be presented that in 2011. It was named after Louis Lehman. And we are going to have another NSS convention almost for sure. It's going to be in Cordon in 2026. At the fairgrounds, we'll have all the cavers from all over the United States here again to see our caves in their area. Next slide. It's a picture from '67. That's me. This is Terry Crane. This is one of our early trips in the Binkley Cave system where we found a park called Fantastic Avenue. And I was early in my career. I was able to go on a lot of big, long trips with Dave Everton and some of the guys until 2012 when we developed Indiana Caverns. Once I got done with that, I've not been able to take any really long trips with them, so I help out in other ways, but I had a lot of great memories. Now, Terry Craig, who led our organization for 3 decades, he lives out on the Bacon Road outside of Marengo. He didn't go caving anymore, but he's still around here. Next slide. This is Terry at Indiana Caverns. He was the brains behind developing Squire Boone. You all know there's a lot of stairs and steel in there. And he helped me. I couldn't have done Indiana Caverns without it. He was living in South Dakota at the time. I brought him back and he helped me. Here's using the cave radio to find the spot where we're going to put the entrance in. It was in a wheat field in 2012 when we started. But we found the spot with the cave radio and we blasted the entrance in. Next slide. The other person who's now the head of the Binkley project is Rand Hazlett. I don't know if any of y'all know him. This is Rand in Binkley's a formation called the Teardrops. Rand started caving and he was leading trips when he was 15 years old. He couldn't even drive a car. He had to have his mom or somebody bring him down. But he was already leading survey teams. And he's in charge of the project today. And Rand's been, he's actually had more active years working in the cave than I have now, since I'm not active when they actually work. So he's worked in there more years than anybody and leads the project today. Next slide. In 2014, we made one of the biggest discoveries in there that we've made. And to get to it, you have to go through what's called Rand's Return River Ride. He helped me develop Indiana Caverns. His first trip back, he pushed this 1,600-foot watercraft, and this is a big spot in it. Most of it, half of it, you got your head turned sideways to breathe. But you go through there, and you eventually, 7 hours in, they discovered the McLean River. That's 7 hours one way to get there. And when we found that, everything we thought we knew about Binkley Cave, it totally turned it upside down on a different way. Next slide. This is the McLean River, and it's a pretty good stream. It's not like Harrison Spring, but it goes to Stoner Spring, and it's got a lot of flow. We named it after Tim McLean, who was one of our best cavers in the recent decades. But we had a trip to push a sump, and they were carrying dive gear in for a guy to dive the sump. And Tim had a heart attack and died in the cave in 2013. So the next year we wanted to name something really significant after him. So we named the McLean River and McLean Mountain after Tim McLean. In this river, there's a downstream and upstream sump. Upstream, we think the cave could go for another 4 or 5 miles up to Middletown. Downstream, Stoner Spring is on Indian Creek, and it's 5 miles straight line distance from the sump. So it'd take us 7 more miles just in the main passage, and there's thousands of acres there that's all got cave in it we haven't found. So someday the cave should be over 100 miles from one of the really big caves in the world. Next slide. This is the McLean Mountain where you can see a person standing here, here, and here. It's the biggest room in the cave, and it's a large place. So at one time, this would have had a big underground mountain, but the water flowed at the same level without changing to another level in this part of the cave so long that it's eaten, the acidic waters eaten most of the mountain up. And that's why there's not a whole lot of the mountain left in there. You don't see that very often. Usually the water drops down to a lower level or something, but it's probably flowed in this passage for 1 million, maybe 1.5 million years, and that's why it's the biggest passage in the cave. Next slide. This is Stoner Spring. Doesn't look real impressive, but you can see a pretty good flow comes out of there. It's the 7th largest spring in Indiana, and that's the outlet for that river. Next slide. So we've been looking since 2014 and 15, we've been looking for a way into all this cave downstream that we hadn't been able to get into. And I found a little bitty hole about this big, and I could tell it was moving air. And so we went back and got a smoke bomb and dug it out a little bit, and it's sucking that whole smoke bomb, and it's just in a hole that big down near Stoner Spring. So next slide. So we pulled our money this time. Instead of digging by hand, we got a great big old track hoe. Started digging in the bluff, got permission, following the air back in there. We finally got into a cave and got back in a couple 100 feet, but they hit a real dangerous breakdown. They hadn't been able to get through. If we could get through, would get us into the downstream end of the system, might help us really blow it open into a big cave, but we haven't got it. Next slide. So at the end of the day, who's your cavers today? This is what some friends that are up that are in Blue Springs caves that are cavers that started out in town. They went on a trip. You can see what kind of car they were driving. This was in the 60s, but they still had an older car. And back at that time, we probably had 25 or so active cave people who liked caves going in with Leo Shotter, Louis Lehman, and George Jackson that were doing stuff. 25 or 30 people. And I'd say today that are really active, there's still about 25 or 30 people in Harrison, Crawford County. I would not be one of the active ones now because me and Dave used to be active, but we're just not anymore. But there's still that many people. But out of those 25, only a couple of them will probably make a significant contribution. A lot of people just like go in, sightsee, drop pits, do it for a few years and move on. Only the rare person sticks with it for a whole career. But cavers today can do things with the technology that you never dreamed of. And I know Dave's been in this is a fantastic pit down in Georgia. It's the deepest pit in the continental United States at 500 feet. You're on a rope, you can see the caves there. And it's one of the really impressive caves down in that area. And a lot of people from Indiana go down there to go in them, and because we don't have those kind of caves up here. Next slide. So this is the last one. There's still more caves to be explored, but you don't go out and walk in them. You seldom just go out and move a rock. Occasionally you can get in one. Sometimes a big rain will open up a new cave, but most of the time you have to dig and scratch and lower water in the spring and all kinds of things. But you got the technology to do it today, and so I suspect we haven't found half the big caves yet. So there's more to do, and it's harder work, but you got the technology to do it, and it gives you a chance to go see something that nobody's ever seen before. I mean, all John and Dave and I have all been plenty of places where no person's ever been before. And another interesting thing is if it's in a stream cave, you can get in one and there's no human been there before, but the trash got there because it washed in with the water. And you'll find trash in a place where no humans ever set foot. So it's an interesting kettle of fish. So that's my presentation. I hope you enjoy it.
Well, thank you.
A little longer than 30 minutes.